Today we're going to talk about seasonal indices, which is an alternative method to smoothing time series data apart from using moving averages. Seasonal indices tell us how much each season, like a month or a quarter, typically differs from the average or the mean. Seasonal indices measure seasonal variation. How much higher or lower is this quarter's data compared to what the average says it should be? In this example, we have the quarterly sale figures for the number of cars sold at a car sales yard in 2023. Using the data given, we can see that we have 5 cars in Q1, 7 in Q2, 9 in Q3, and 3 in Q4. What we want to do is figure out the average number of cars sold in each quarter. To determine that, we can add all numbers together and divide by 4. So the average number of cars sold is 6. Then what we're going to do is we're going to determine the actual number of cars sold compared to the average number of cars sold. If we divide the actual number of cars by the average number of cars sold each quarter, that'll give us a ratio, which we can then determine the seasonal index from as a percentage. So in Q1, we sell 83% of the average of cars. This means that it's 17% below the average. In quarter 3, we sell 50% above the average. What you'll note is that if we add all 4 of these seasonal indices together, they should add to 400%. If we divided that by 4, it would give us an average of 100%. We use seasonal indices when we want to remove seasonal effects from the data, or in other words, deseasonalize it. And we also use it to make more accurate comparisons or predictions. Lastly, we use it to understand how certain time periods affect the overall pattern compared to the average. So let's have a look at a slightly more in-depth example. This example shows the number of mobile phones sold by a Vodafone dealership every quarter for 3 years. We're going to go in-depth and calculate each of the seasonal indices for the first, second, third, and fourth quarters. The first step in doing this is to figure out the quarterly mean for the number of phones sold in each year. If we wanted to calculate the quarterly mean for year number 1, we'll just add all 4 sales figures together. 1637 plus 1489 plus 1244 plus 1750. We divide all of that by 4. We have an average sales figure of 1,530 phones per quarter in year 1, 1,299 in the second year, and 1,147 in the third year. Next thing we'll do is we'll figure out the actual number of phones sold each quarter as a percentage of the average quarterly sales figures. To determine this percentage of 106.99%, we'll take the actual number of phone sales divided by the average number of phone sales and multiply by 100. We repeat this process for the other 2 first quarters in year 2 and year 3. We see that we have 108.16% and 109.24%. This means that usually in the first quarter of each year, we sell slightly above the average for the whole year. If I take these percentages and add them into a new table, I'm going to figure out the seasonal index over the 3 years for the first quarter. I'm going to find the average of these 3 percentages. The average of the 3 percentages is 108.13%. This means that on average, we sell 8.13% above the mean in the first quarter of each year. Converting this to a decimal, I get 1.0813. If I repeat this process for the second quarter of each year, I find that the actual number of phones sold is a little less than 100% compared to the quarterly mean for the year. This means that we sell slightly below the average number of phones in the second quarter of each year. If I input the second quarter data into the table and average the 3 percentages, I find that the seasonal index for the second quarter of each year is 96.86% or 0.9686. This means that we sell just over 3% below the average in the second quarter. Once again, if I repeat this process for the third quarter and the fourth quarter of each year, I can see that in the third quarter of each year, I sell well below the average. In the fourth quarter of each year, I sell well above average. Once I fill in my second table completely, I can see that the average of the 3 percentages for the third quarter is 77.83% and 117.17% for the fourth quarter. If I add these 4 seasonal indices together, I should get 400%. In this case, due to rounding, I get 399.99%, but the seasonal indices should average 100%. So for example, if you're calculating seasonal indices quarterly, you should get a total of 400% for an average of 100%. If you were doing seasonal indices calculated on a monthly basis, you would get 1200%. If it was a weekly basis, 700%, etc. Alternatively, if you were to add together the decimals should add up to 4. Now let's talk about what we do with the seasonal index once we know what it is. For example, the seasonal index for quarter 1 using the average percentage method was 1.0813. We're going to use this figure to seasonally adjust the sales figures for the first quarter of each year. This is also known as deseasonalising. The formula that we're going to use to find the deseasonalized or the seasonally adjusted value is to take the actual value and then divide it by the seasonal index. What this is going to do is it's going to reduce above average sale figures down and increase below average sale figures up. For the first quarter of year 1, the actual number of phones sold was 1,637. The seasonal index for quarter 1 is 1.0813. To deseasonalize the actual number of sales in Q1 of year 1, divide these two numbers and I get a seasonally adjusted figure of 1,514 phones sold that you can see here. If I wanted to seasonally adjust the sales figures for the second quarter of year 1, I would take the actual number of sales, 1,489, and divide it by the seasonal index of 96.86% or 0.968. That's going to give me a seasonally adjusted figure of 1,537. And I can continue this process using each individual seasonal index that relates to each individual quarter. And there you can see the completed list of the seasonally adjusted sales figures. Using this smooth data, we can identify the underlying trend. You can see pretty clearly here that we have a decreasing trend in the number of sales. Let's recap. Seasonal indices show how each period compares to the average. Seasonal indices are calculated using the average percentage method. We remove seasonal effects using seasonal indices, and this helps us make fair comparisons or predictions. Indices greater than 1 or 100% are above average, below 1 or 100% are below average. The average of all indices should equal to 100%.